This evening, in our consideration of the life of Moses, obviously we come to Exodus chapter 18, because that's the chapter we read together. And, well, you know I don't give all my titles, all my sermons a title, but I've titled this one, A Joyful Interlude. And that's based on the fact that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, joins him for this period that's covered in this 18th chapter. But as we've seen, Jethro doesn't turn up empty-handed. He comes along with Moses' wife Zipporah and their two sons, Gershom and Eleazar. Now there are actually a number of lessons in this passage for us to learn from. And firstly, we see how Jethro, he purposely came to see Moses. In verse 6 we read, I, thy father-in-law Jethro, am come unto thee, and thy wife and her two sons with her. Now, we have good reason to believe that Jethro kept his flocks in that general vicinity that the Israelites were then camped in. Because back in chapter 3, when Moses was a fugitive from Egypt, we are told in verse 1 of that chapter, now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. We know Horeb was where they were at this time. But although that was the case, we can see here that this was not a chance encounter. Jethro deliberately seeks out Moses to bring to him his wife and his children. Reminds us that when we sing the hymn that we've just sung, we sing, I do not know what lies ahead, we sing the truth with the words in the chorus, that with God things don't just happen. Everything by him is planned. And Jethro, of course, here he gives us a picture of that. Now, I've come across people, and you probably have too, who despise the notion that everything happens for a purpose. Now, these people, they're not Christians. I suppose they feel comfortable thinking that everything is just random, although somehow I doubt that they believe that consistently. But, you know, there are even Christians, or at least professing Christians, who just don't believe that God could possibly be that much in control. And this despite Jesus saying elsewhere in Matthew 10:29, he said, are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. God is in control. He's in absolute control. Now, saying that's easy, but we can't pretend. We can't pretend that we can fully know God's ways. But we can know truly, as Francis Schaeffer would say, we can know truly what he has revealed to us. And what is revealed is that God himself is not subject to the forces that he has created. Instead, he governs them in accordance with his wisdom and the way that he created them. And Christians then, they ought to take great comfort from that knowledge. Everything does happen for a purpose and with purpose. Anyway, returning to this passage in Exodus 18, it tells us that Moses had sent his wife and two sons back, that is back to Jethro. Now, we're not told when that was, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that it had been at some point before or during that time when Moses was confronting Pharaoh. I say that simply because there must have been some danger in confronting the king of the land in the way that Moses did. It seems to me that it would be in keeping with the nature of a good husband and father to put his family out of harm's way. But whenever it was, Jethro knew that it was not right for a family to spend too much time apart unnecessarily. Having said that, of course, parents do need to appreciate that a time must come when their children have to go off and make a life for themselves. It's not always easy, but they have to do it. But while they're still young, generally speaking, the best place for them is with their parents. It is strange, is it not, that in the society that we have created today, some parents are glad not to be with their children. I used to hear comments when I worked in the office. I used to hear comments like, I'd go up the wall if I had to spend all day at home with the kids. I can't help thinking that there will be a big price to pay for such a societal attitude. In fact, we're probably already paying that price. Well, here we are reminded that Moses' son Gershom, whose name means foreigner, he was so called because Moses had been a stranger in a strange land. And we looked at that in some detail when we were going through chapter 2. But here we are told the name of his second son, Eleazar. His name means God is help. He's called this then, so it would be like a perpetual reminder to Moses that he had been delivered by divine providence from punishment in Egypt after he had killed an Egyptian who had been abusing an Israelite. You'll recall that account, I'm sure. Now, remember, at this point, Moses is 80 years old. But we are told in verse 8 that Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him. Well, obeisance is not a word that we use much these days, but it basically means to bow down. Moses was honouring Jethro. So this is another example of the Ten Commandments being in force before they were given on the 2 tables of stone. No one before that time would have known that this was the 5th commandment, but all would have known that it was the law of God because it was written on their hearts, as the Apostle Paul later put it. So that just means it's woven into the fabric of our being. We know these things are right because it's there. It's a part of the way we were made. And although the commandment states, honour thy father and thy mother, we see here the truth of the wider meaning of that. We say now that the 10 Commandments are a summary of the whole law. And so we see that here because Jethro was not Moses' father, was he? He was his father-in-law. So we see then, of course, that as it's true with all the 10 Commandments, the requirement of the law is far broader, far wider than just that which the bare words state. So that's one lesson. The law was in force from the beginning, before the 10 Commandments were even engraved on stone, and how right it is then for parents, for children to honour children honour their parents, and for all then to honour those who are in authority above them. And of course it is right for families, especially with young children, to be together as much as possible. But then another lesson for us in this passage is that good news about God's dealings can have a broader encouragement. Its encouragement can be far broader than you might imagine. What I mean by that is, well, if you look at verse 8, after Moses and Jethro have greeted one another, Moses tells his father-in-law all that has happened. Now, clearly, we can see from the passage, clearly Jethro knew that Moses had brought the Israelites out of Egypt and down to Mount Sinai. He must have known this, or else he would not have been able to bring Zipporah and the 2 boys along with him. But now, in the comfort of his tent, Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. He told them then about the plagues and the Passover. He told of being hemmed in by the Red Sea as the advancing Egyptian army came upon them. He told them how God miraculously parted the sea for them to cross, only for the sea to return and drown the Egyptians. He probably also told how the Lord provided drinking water in places where ordinarily there was no such water. And no doubt, I suspect, he would have told Jethro about the manna. And so I think you can almost see Jethro sitting there, enthralled, sitting on the edge of his seat, as we might say, these days. And what was the result of him hearing all this? The answer to that question is in the following verses. Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel. Now notice that. He rejoiced for the goodness which the Lord had done, not to Jethro, but to Israel. And Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians." But he didn't stop there either, did he? He says he took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. So I think you can see what I mean when I say that news about God's dealings can have a broader encouragement than to you alone. The good had been done to the Israelites, but Jethro, a non-Israelite, not involved in what had happened, he is the one seen rejoicing. And not just rejoicing, though, but he is brought a step closer to knowing the true God. You see, the sacrifice and the offerings he makes, they appear, don't they? They appear to be shared by Moses and Aaron and the elders of Israel. This is highly suggestive of it being an acceptable sacrifice. So how does that impact us? Well, let me ask you this. How often do you share news of the good things that God has done for you? Now, I'm not going to embarrass you, but I'm pretty sure that none of us do that as often as we might. But think about Jethro and how he was affected by this news. He nothing to do with him, and yet he was seen rejoicing. We've seen making offerings to God. So let this account be a spur to us to be less reticent about sharing good news, because it could well have a positive impact on others. As I say, it brought Jethro closer to knowing the true God. Now, I can't say that in this event that he was brought to saving faith at this time. You look at his statement in verse 11, he says, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods." At the start of the chapter, we were reminded that Jethro was a priest, the priest of Midian. He would have known about all sorts of other gods, and he'd quite probably made sacrifices to them as well. But he's now come to that position which King Nebuchadnezzar also arrived at after Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego survived the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar, at that time, he issued a decree that no one should say anything against their God, because, as it says in Daniel 3:29, there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Now, it's not that long ago we went through the book of Daniel, and we noted when we did that did not mean that Nebuchadnezzar was converted at that point, but we do have good reason to believe that he was converted some point later. It was a stepping stone on his journey to saving faith. And it could well be that although Jethro was only saying at that point that the God of the Israelites is the greatest, which would imply the greatest among many, he may also indeed have subsequently made that final step to saving faith. So what I'm saying then to you is that you might become despondent when when no one takes any notice or appears to take no notice of you when you share God's good dealings with you. But remember, what you say to them might simply be the beginning of the path that leads to their salvation. And of course, the gospel, the news that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners and that he did this by dying for the sins of others. Well, that is the best news that you can share. If you get opportunity to share that, then do so. But don't think that if you can't do this, then there is nothing that you can do. You see, this account of Jethro tells us something else. Well, although Jethro didn't stay with the Israelites, he must have been with them for a little while, but he does eventually depart. He went his way into his own land. And I say it's not unreasonable to assume that he will have been brought to saving faith. I can't say that certainly, but it's not a bad assumption. Well, another lesson, our third lesson that's set before us in this chapter is that the greater the responsibility we bear, the more help we require. You see here, we're told that after the joy of meeting up with Jethro and receiving back his wife and his children, Moses, he had to carry on with his day job, with life as normal, as we would say. And so from this we have to learn that we can't let joyful occasions become a means of laziness. We must keep up with what's expected of us. You know how easy it is to get carried away at times like Christmas. But if we are to be good disciples of Jesus Christ, then our duty, that which God requires of us, it still must be maintained at such times. Well, life as normal for Moses appears to be judging the people all day. And Jethro notices this and he asks Moses, well, what's going on? And Moses tells him all about his work, what he has to do. Basically, he is the mouthpiece of God. He makes known to the people the way God wants them to behave and to live. And then, possibly to the surprise of Moses, Jethro tells him, the thing that thou doest is not good. You can almost see what might be going through Moses' mind when Jethro says this, or at least what would be going through our mind if we were in that position. Who does he think he is, telling me that what I'm doing is not good? I'm the one who God met with in the wilderness. I'm the one who confronted Pharaoh. I'm the one God chose as the instrument to bring the plagues upon Egypt. I'm the one that led the Israelites out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. Him? He's just a pagan priest. What does he know? Of course what I'm doing is right. Now, I'm sure we would be a bit like that. I hope not, but I can't help thinking that the old nature would rise up in us in that position. But of course, Moses has taken this position on himself, probably because he didn't trust the others to know what to do. And let's be fair, if the Israelites were as quarrelsome with each other as they were with Moses, then we might also think that they were not up to the task. Again, when I worked in the office, and I expect many of you have encountered this, but when a new assistant was given to you, quite often instead of training them, or quite getting them to do something, I'll do it myself, it's quicker that way. You didn't think that they would appreciate the intricacies of the task. I don't know about you, obviously, but that was a trap that I fell into more than once. And so I think we can understand how it was that Moses ended up being the sole judge of the people. He just couldn't believe they'd get it right. But he was in the wrong and his father-in-law was right. Back in the office, it's worth spending time to train up an assistant to undertake some of the lesser tasks so that you have time to deal with the bigger task. That was exactly the problem that Jethro saw. Again, verse 18, thou wilt surely wear away, both thou and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. And so you can see there's actually two problems there. Moses himself will get worn out and therefore will not be able to lead and guide the people as he should. But how, you might ask, how will his actions wear the people out? Well, just think about it. The people came to him from morning to evening. It was an all-day task. And they came to him alone, no one else, just to him. Would Moses have been tired come the evening? I'm sure any man would be. So how easy would it be to make a mistake in judgment in that state? And if that many people were coming to him, there must have been a possibility that he could not see everybody that came. So, in short, justice would be delayed, and justice delayed is justice denied, as the legal maxim has it. So Jethro advises Moses to seek out godly men to assist him. He suggests a kind of pyramid structure so that various cases can be heard by appropriately knowledgeable men. And that way, of course, Moses is freed to do what is most obviously the most important work of teaching the people what God requires of them, and then also to be able to hear the hardest cases that his deputies just cannot manage. And so from this we learn a couple of things. First of all, even the most equipped person cannot do everything. And to try to do so risks everything falling apart. I expect you know that in some churches the pastor is expected to do everything. But that just won't work. Here at the VRs, each and every one of us needs to think about what we can do so that the pastor is not inundated. Now, I know I'm speaking about myself there. I know that's me. I'm not crying out for help. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is that if you find yourself falling into the mindset of, oh, the pastor can do that, you need to think of what the pastor won't be able to do if he does the something that you think he could do. Now, I can't overemphasize this point. The church is a body. The church is the body of Christ. As such, every member must play its part. With your physical body, there's no part of your physical body that serves no purpose. And so in like fashion, we must all fulfill our purpose within the church. And then also we see here is that good advice can come from the most unlikely sources. Now, we've already noted that Jethro is an unbeliever, at this point anyway, and yet he can see what needs to be done. So even unbelievers may still be able to give believers good advice. Now you might, well, how is that possible, you might think? Well, you see, we mustn't forget that all human beings, whoever they are all created in the image of God. And although sin has seriously marred that image, it has not wiped it out altogether. We see that most obviously in people's yearning for love and their desire for justice. That all shows that they are God's creation. But we see it in many other things as well. So don't shun good advice simply and only on the grounds of it being given by an unbeliever. But here then in Exodus 18, even Jethro notes the importance of his advice needing God's approval. He says, in the beginning of verse 23, it says, if thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so. So this is the counterbalance. This is the counterbalance to taking advice from others. You can't just take advice from others because they've said something. And this applies to advice given to you, not just from unbelievers, but from other believers as well. You have to weigh up what you have been advised against what is revealed in the Bible. Now, if the word doesn't say anything specific in regard to what you have been told, then it comes down to sanctified common sense. I'm saying the Lord is not going to say anything more to you. The Lord expects you to use your mind. Now here, in this instance, it is quite evident that the Lord did approve of this advice given by Jethro. It was the right thing to do. Now that said, why didn't God tell Moses that in the first place, from the beginning? But it's easy to see that Moses himself, he was being taught a lesson. Patently, because it came to pass, the Lord wanted him to do this. But he clearly was not going to spoon feed him. Instead, he allowed Moses to be humbled, rebuked even, by an unbeliever for not using his brain to work out what needed to be done. So what I'd say then is that you mustn't think that when the Bible is silent, that the Lord will speak to you from elsewhere. No, you are God's image bearer. He expects you to apply yourself and to apply that which he has revealed to us. Now there is a fourth lesson in this passage, and it's also drawn from Jethro giving Moses his advice. And that lesson is that God cannot be limited. I mean, think again of who Jethro was. I mean, who would have thought that the Lord would use a pagan priest of Midian to inform Moses, God's chosen instrument, of what he should do? You couldn't make it up, as we say. And we are very prone to thinking that God can't do this or he can't do that. God can do anything insofar as it doesn't involve not being God. It's sad, but we have to add that caveat these days. That's because there's no shortage of smart Alecks who think that they are very clever when they ask the question, can God do anything? And getting an affirmative answer, they go back on to ask questions like, well, could God make a rock so big that even he couldn't lift it? Now, they think this is clever, because either way you answer that question, you are saying there is something that God cannot do. Now, the Bible clearly tells us in 2 Timothy 2:13 that God cannot deny himself. He cannot stop being God. So, when we say that God can do anything, we are assuming that everyone understands that simple fact, that God cannot not be God. Not too many negatives, is it? God can do anything, in any way, that he sees fit. And of course, the most surprising thing, I would say, that he has done is to save sinners. If you look at the state of us, of human beings, that God should care so much to save a people for himself, he wouldn't believe it. To save people, not just sinners, people who have set themselves against him. And yet to do that, to save such people, the Son of God had to come into this world as a human being, because that's who Jesus Christ is, and he had to die the death that they deserved. Why on earth would he want to do that? Well, there is only one reason, and that is simply because he loved those people. If you were to think that God could only accept you because you were good enough, well, you'd never come to him. Sin has done serious damage to us. There is not a quick or easy fix to what sin has done and continues to do for us, to us. Only the death of Jesus Christ can pay the price of your sin and make you right with God. And don't think that Jesus wouldn't have given his life for someone like you. Everyone that has come to Jesus could have said the same thing. But all those who have come to Jesus will tell you that they have been received. They have been saved. Difficult though that may be to believe. We cannot tell God what to do, but he has done so much for lost sinners like ourselves. So I say, don't let your own ideas as to what God should do, don't let those ideas shut you out of his everlasting kingdom. Listen to what he says and obey what he says. Amen.